Welcome to Canada's podcast. So, Romesh, welcome to Canada's podcast. And as I normally do, we're here in Toronto and it's going to be 20 degrees tomorrow, but you were telling me it's going to be snowing like next week. Oh, so it's spring, so what's new? But, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, why you're here on our entrepreneurial podcast.
Thanks so much, Philip. And again, thanks for the pleasure of being on. I'm honored. So as I said, my name is Romesh Hettiarachchi. I'm a commercial lawyer at BNN Legal Counsel, which is a small law firm in Etobicoke on the west of Toronto. And I'm here because I think that we as lawyers can do so much more when it comes to our entrepreneurs and to our small businesses. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I want to talk about is how do small businesses and entrepreneurs use lawyers effectively as they build really successful and adaptable businesses for this digital era.
Okay. We'll come to that, but the first thing is, I think lawyers are somewhat entrepreneurial in a sense. They generally move into partnerships, even if they're in the big 10 kind of thing. But you've broken away from the establishment, if you like. Why do that? Why not use your skills in that establishment?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think part of that question actually lies in my roots as being an immigrant. I think immigrants are at their core entrepreneurial. We are moving into different environments and adapting to those new environments to the best that we can.
Being an immigrant,
and so
I can being an immigrant, the same thing. Yeah. Exactly.
and I think so. So I think that's part of that. So, I started practicing law almost a decade ago, and I mean, when I initially, I didn't even want to be a lawyer initially. That's a story in and of itself. But when I started this journey, I really wanted to have sort of all the trappings of what being a lawyer is all about, right? Mm-hmm. And so so I was always taught about the importance of the billable hour, how you get clients and networking, all that type of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And I started my journey off as a litigator, so people would pay me to go argue in court, which sounds interesting, but it actually isn't. But over time, I started being sort of like the problem solver that clients came to rely on. And they've started valuing not my skills at going into court, but resolving problems. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I started developing my skill set to become a quote unquote master negotiator. Mm-hmm. To the extent now that I would think that I think I'm actually a better business person than I'm a lawyer. And so a couple of years ago, what ended up happening is I had some personal issues that really led me on this journey to rethink what it means to be a lawyer in an age where we're doing everything digitally, right? This was obviously pre-pandemic, right? So This was a time when you still had to go into the offices to talk to a lawyer. And I took a couple of weeks to remap and to reimagine, re-explore what are the role of a lawyer in a modern business. Mm-hmm. And that's really what kickstarted the journey to start what I call BNN Legal Counsel. Okay. A law firm that really focuses on being the sort of the modern strategic advisor to entrepreneurs and business owners.
So, I interview a lot of people from fintech, insurance, banking, whatever you want to call it. I've interviewed a couple of people from legal who have been trying to do things a little differently. And it seems to me that those everyone thinks of legal as super establishment, accounting as super establishment. banking, finance, a super establishment. But with the arrival of fintech and with the arrival of digital and radically different, execution technologies in terms of getting the work done, communicating with people and things like that, what do you see as the future of the legal business? Because it is a business, the legal business.
Yeah, honestly, it's hard to say. I mean, at least in Ontario, the powers that be and the Chief Justice have done a really good job, and the Attorney General have both done incredible work in modernizing aspects of our profession.
Mm-hmm.
Up until a year ago, we were still filing documents in court in paper, and now, through the amazing work of both the Chief Justice and the Attorney General, we now got up more of a paperless system, which is great. I no longer need to go downtown to argue motions. I think there's a lot of incentives for lawyers not to change. I think that's the reality, right? And I would say that, let me give you more of a tech-oriented answer. Change only happens once there's a problem to be solved.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of the larger law firms, you have the powers that be, the partners or the administrators, that still benefit from an old way of doing things. And again, this is just my observations. I've talked to people at these firms, and to a certain degree, this is corroborated. But just from an external perspective, the billable hours still dominate. You have obviously alternative legal service providers and alternative fees, but they really like this billable hour. And partnerships, how you generate revenue, is all designed around this business model.
Mm-hmm.
And until that business model changes, there's no real incentive for the practice of law to change.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes things more challenging is that our governing body, the Law Society of Ontario, here in Ontario at least, they tend to have taken a bit of a standoffish approach to the transformation of the legal profession.
Mm-hmm.
For reasons that are not altogether clear to me. We spend more time arguing about some of the regulatory trappings of governance, rather than thinking about and reimagining what does the modern lawyer look like. And will we be practicing law 5 years from now the way we're practicing law today? Which obviously I don't think is true.
So, so you're trying to do it differently. I mean, what's the vision for your business today and, 5 years from now?
That's a great question. I think this may seem that I don't want to give anybody the impression that I'm the only one doing this. I think there's lots of other lawyers who are trying to do this type of thing, right? We're all trying to push the boundaries, and we're all having conversations about how to make that happen. But where I see the future of the profession is understanding the role that we as lawyers play in the life of our clients. And I'm specifically talking about business lawyers. This analogy does not work as well for like criminal law or family law. But when it comes to our clients that are businesses that are looking for commercial legal advice, they really have 4 ways of how to use their lawyer. One is what I would call the paramedic or the triage approach, right? Mm-hmm. We're only going to talk to a lawyer when there's an emergency. In all other cases, there's just a cost and they're expensive. I don't want to talk to them. And then you have the second approach, which is where the business owner says, I need to talk to a lawyer. Let's go talk to a lawyer. That's what I would call the managerial approach. These approaches are very much reactive. I identify an issue. I must talk to a lawyer. Where the future of the practice of legal practice is going, in my view, is the exploration of what I call the proactive approach to lawyering. Either lawyers as being tools to avoid risk, so to identify and address risk, so the role of a lifeguard, or alternatively, the role of a lawyer as being a strategic advisor. We're going to help the business grow and make more money. And that's, I think, where this is going in terms of a legal profession. like, look, and correct me if I'm wrong, Phil. I mean, when you think about a lawyer's supposed to do three things, or at least one of three things. You're either solving problems, you're minimizing risk, or you're managing process. Good lawyers will do all three. You really shouldn't be a lawyer if you can't do any of them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's interesting. You've made me recollect, which is quite a long ways back when I was fairly new to this country, an entrepreneur, and I had an accountant. His brother happened to be a lawyer as well, and the thing that he said to me that I've kind of kept in the background is do everything before you come to your lawyer or your accountant. This is a business. This is business.
Yeah.
Before you come to your lawyer and accountant, and only use us to complete it. Is that a fair? I mean, it's a bit off track, but what you're saying is that that maybe the future is more of an advisory role, and in a sense, this gentleman was being an advisor and saying, don't come and ask me the things that don't build your bill up. You see what I mean?
Yeah,
that's a long time ago. But I mean, are we looking at kind of today's version of that, or is it because there's more detail available that you move to an advisor? The online to everybody nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I think the democratization of the internet has really given clients the belief that they can simply have Google as sort of their legal advisor.
Mm-hmm.
The corollary of that is obviously that lawyers are not insured to give business advice. I just want to be very careful here.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
All that being said, I think that there are lots of ways that clients can minimize their legal fees if they have the right questions. Right. So in your instance, Philip, if you had, let's say, a friend to say, come talk to me and I'll give you a checklist of X, Y, and Z,
Mm-hmm.
and use this to go talk to your lawyer, in some cases that is beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The challenge with law, obviously, is that it keeps changing. So by way of example, you had an Ontario Court of Appeal decision last year called Swagon and Waxdale, and that changed the way that employment agreements are interpreted or construed. And that has really significant implications if you're a business that has lots of employees.
What's the greatest challenge now that you're facing in your sort of new legal kind of movement, if you like?
Biggest challenge. I mean, I think that by and large, we as lawyers there's an educational component where clients see lawyers as one and the same. John Doe, Jane Doe, and myself are all the same person. And what I would encourage clients to think about, people to think about, is the value of developing a relationship with a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes that has a negative effect. So if they've got a really bad experience with a lawyer and they see all lawyers the same, they'll see me the same as a bad lawyer or any other lawyer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, I think the challenge is that, again, as a legal profession, as our governing bodies, we still hold to the idea that a lawyer is a lawyer is a lawyer. And we don't really encourage or diversify the risk of creating more new innovative business models.
Mm-hmm.
And because each individual lawyer is shouldering all of that risk,
Mm-hmm.
transforming your practice and creating new relationships becomes, in some cases, too risky, right? So, for example, I'm right now putting together like a subscription-based legal service model,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for X amount, you have access to X, Y, and Z, right? For templates, advice, or whatnot, right? But I've just got to be cautious in how I do it because I'm worried about taking on too much of risk.
Mm-hmm.
And as a small law firm, we don't want to take that on.
Yeah, I mean,
Does that make sense?
that as a business, if you get the lawyer part of it, you've been at this for a couple of years. You know what's you know, you've probably hit some unexpected challenges.
Yeah.
You know, how do you typically handle those challenges? Is there a process you
Oh man.
you know, or
Yeah, I mean,
not necessarily use? Is it a process you've evolved to that helps? You know, I don't know if we have it at the beginning. You know.
it's been a journey. I mean, starting up your law firm is inherently entrepreneurial, and
Mhm.
part of being entrepreneurial is being able to make mistakes and learn from them, adapt, right?
Right.
And I think pricing is definitely a challenge. And like most businesses will be familiar with this, like how do you price your services in a way that allows you to pay all of your suppliers and your employees and still have some healthy profit margin? That's been a challenge that I still face today. Like how do I price an agreement, right? Do I price the agreement on a flat fee basis, on a project basis, or some other way of pricing it? For me, that's been a challenge. I think that what I typically try and do when it comes to pricing, at least, is try and figure out how much of value I'm providing to the client, right? There's this idea out there that, or there are some clients out there that want to go to the cheapest lawyer out there, and I'm not that guy. If you want cheap, I will happily send clients to places where I know they have lawyers that do work for the minimum dollar value. I much rather focus on having a really good process that clients can identify, saying like, look, it's kind of like a stage process, right? Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Mm-hmm. And pricing according to those stages. That gives a lot more transparency to the client about what's being delivered and when fees are due. And they end up becoming more happy with the process.
So, you know, what advice would you give an entrepreneur? I mean, just because you're really just 2 years out, looking to start a business now, that you've learned in the last 24 months that maybe you didn't know before. It's, you know.
Yeah, that's a good question. Whenever I talk to a client that's looking to start a business, before they talk about contracts and corporate, before they talk about any of that, mm-hmm. I always ask them to answer like a couple of questions. One, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Who are you solving that problem for? What makes your solution valuable? Mm-hmm. And why should the potential customer or the customer choose your solution over others? Mm-hmm. And by asking these 4 questions form the core of what we call the value proposition of a business or of a company, of a product.
Right.
If you're not solving a problem, you really shouldn't be going into business, right? Mm-hmm. And once you ask those questions can form the core of how you start pricing, mm-hmm. right? So I think that's my piece. Ask those 4 questions and.
Well, I mean, on the other shoe, you know, what's the best? You know, we've all been mentored and stuff like that. Whether it's been parents, whether it's been friends, whether it's been you know, people at university or school or whatever. What's the best piece of advice that you've ever received? And I like to qualify it that you keep on using. You know, we get lots of advice, but there's 1 or 2 things that we use that crop up weekly, kind of thing. Yeah.
So I'll give a book recommendation. Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Okay.
Great book. Lots of good advice there.
Okay.
But the one advice I keep using, it was actually given to me by a client when it comes to negotiations.
Right.
And he says, never get emotional about the negotiation.
Right. And
be willing to walk away from the table. And that has been something that I've carried through all my negotiations. Mm-hmm. I had this really crazy file last week where that was a simple mantra I kept saying in my head: don't get emotional.
Yeah.
And it's funny how that works, because by not getting emotional, no matter how much of stress the other side's going through or your client's going through, you are even keel. Right? And so that advice that helps you when it comes to buying and selling property, negotiating contracts, it's been super helpful. I've always been able to say, like, look, I've got somebody else. I'm okay with this negotiation failing.
Yeah.
And that's been good. That's been advice that's been well served.
Okay, let's move off the deep stuff and move to some rapid fire questions.
Sure.
Not that they're not deep, but you know. What book are you currently reading, and what books and listening to, whatever, would you recommend? Book,
So I mentioned Chris Voss. I think that's fantastic. That's a fantastic book. I love Principles by Ray Dalio. That was a book recommendation by another lawyer colleague that I found to be fantastic. And again, it's right there on my bookshelf. Honestly, like, that's been I'm still reading it, still trying to soak it through, and trying to figure out how to use that and integrate those principles into my business. I think that's really, for me, principles is something that I'm going to try and integrate into my business over the long term.
Are you a morning or a night person?
Ooh, morning. I'm forced to be a morning person because I've got 2 young kids, so I don't have the option to be a night person.
You used to be a night person.
Truth be told, I've got to be honest. I was never really a night person. I've always loved early mornings, and having kids just gives me a better excuse.
So, if you weren't doing the legal stuff that you're doing now, what would you be doing instead?
Entrepreneurship. Like I said, I think
I can't think of anything else.
Like, honestly, like this goes back to what I said earlier. Like, I didn't initially want to be a lawyer,
right?
And I was actually fairly left wing at that point. I mean, still progressive, but not the same way. But now I love thinking about business models. Like, I can design business systems in my head. And I really enjoy that. It's fun for me. It's a fun exercise.
So you have to pick one word to describe you. What would it be, and why?
Authentic. Yeah, I don't have the one word to describe me today. Definitely authentic. I think there was a time in my life where I think I struggled to please other people.
Good word.
And now I'm pretty straightforward with everybody that I meet. And I don't like, and this goes back to principles, right? Like, his whole thing is being authentic to yourself. And yeah, I have no filter right now when it comes to people that I dislike. So it's okay.
Well, what's keeping you up at night? Apart from kids.
Kids is definitely one of them, especially when you have a newborn. Honest to goodness, climate change. Yeah, I think climate change is one of the things that does keep me up at night. And going back to a conversation earlier, I think we as a profession are really not prepared for climate change, and for the impact that climate change may have on our practices, our society, and our relationships with other people. Again, coming from an immigrant, when I see the impact that climate change has outside of Canada, I think that's going to be drastic. So, climate change.
Okay. I don't know, climate change. I was reading in the Guardian that actually, the human race is going to stop producing by 2 years before 2048, because of all the crap in the system that's residing in our bodies and reducing fertility. It's so, which comes first, no children or no world? It's kind of interesting,
Yeah.
Maybe getting rid of the human race. I don't know.
Well, John Oliver did a bit about how by 2030 or 2035 there's going to be more plastic in the ocean than fish.
Oh yeah, that's right. I saw that.
So
you know what, Romesh? Thank you. It's been a really good interview, and some real interesting things. I think we have to watch as I said, the legal profession and see how things will change. It's quite interesting.
it will. I mean, it will. It just sometimes it takes a little bit of a kick up the to get things done. So sometimes.
So thanks for coming on Canada's podcast. Really appreciate it, and thanks everyone for listening, viewing, whatever. Okay.
The pleasure was mine. Cheers.